Hello guys, so at the time of recording this, I'm still waiting for ContraPoints to upload so that I can release TERFs Part 8, and in the meantime I've just been casually getting, ahead of the curve in a variety of areas. But I'm imagining that by the time this video gets uploaded, it will probably be early in August, and that's relevant because August is when my birthday is. And I had a thought. Basically, I'm aware that some YouTubers who I follow who are sort of academic will have a situation where they have like an Amazon list. So if it's, for example, a history YouTuber or a theology YouTuber or a philosophy YouTuber, they'll have a little Amazon list with things related to the stuff they cover, and people can buy it for them. And I thought this might be a fun idea for 4 reasons. Firstly, because I imagine some people might not have Patreon accounts and might not want to start Patreon accounts, but pretty much everybody will probably have an Amazon account. Secondly, I do get sometimes comments from people saying that they want to give me money, but they don't want to kind of get locked into the monthly Patreon thing. And sometimes I will get people like giving me Patreon like $20 for a month, and then as soon as the month's over, they then cancel it because they wanted to give me $20, which is obviously absolutely fine, but this would be quite an effective way to do that. So rather than, if you want to just give one lump sum payment, well, a pretty easy way to do that would just be to buy me a book that would be, equivalent to the amount you want to spend. So I figured that might be a good idea. And then the third reason is because it would mean that you could know quite directly that you are funding stuff related to this channel. Now, I would obviously stress that the people who give on Patreon, effectively what they're doing is buying the time, it's paying for the time that it takes to produce these videos. And obviously it does take a decent amount of time. I actually kind of was thinking about my schedule and I worked out I do 13 hours a week on either videos or reading for videos, like reading related topics. But I can appreciate that for some people, it might be nice just to know that you are directly doing something related to the channel. So not just kind of in a nebulous sense, giving me some money and trusting that kind of I will then be like, oh, I've got money, so I'll kind of translate that into working harder on videos and things like that in a sort of indirect sense. Although I would hope that you could trust me to do that. But yeah, obviously in this case, it's you're buying books related to kind of research and things like that I want to look into, books related to gender identity. So, very much related. Now, I should at this point stress that I don't really want people to stop giving on Patreon so that they can buy books. Because ultimately, giving on Patreon, the big thing about giving on Patreon is that it gives me an idea of like how much, I guess like what the income is from doing this. And for example, I'm not thinking that it's necessarily realistic that I would ever get to that 100% where I could do this full time, but it would be interesting if I could get to, say, for example, 25% and say, you know what, actually, in that case, I just need a job maybe to do 3/4 of my kind of working week with, and then I can do a quarter focused on this channel and things like that. So it's just nice to kind of have an idea of how it all comes together, financially. Anyway, and the fourth reason is just that I think if I do get quite a few of these books bought, then I will open them on a YouTube video and say, hey, let's see what books I got. Thank you, everybody. So yeah, it will be, hopefully I will actually be able to get, I'm not quite sure how it works. I've made the list and I don't know exactly what the, important second step is of actually making it so that you guys can view the list and get things on the list. Overall, I think relative to the number of subscribers I have quite a large number of patrons, and it kind of suggests to me that you guys are very willing to support this, and I figured because of that, it might be a nice idea to give you something which means you can, like I say, much more directly support this by, purchasing books which would be directly relevant to the stuff I cover on this channel. And I've tried to put quite a variety of books on there, so if you want to check out, you should see them. Some of the books are like pro gender identity extremism, some of the books are anti. I think I've got more pro books because that's the kind of person I am. I like to read arguments that I disagree with more than I like to read arguments that I agree with. But yeah, if you check out there, you can just see what there is, and if you do want to do anything like that, then I would really appreciate it. So thank you. With that said, this should be a continuation of the response that I started probably in the last video, which was, its response to this. Why can I not talk? Basically, this is part 2.
Instead of either the anxiety or ambivalence that we have to go through in our daily lives with our bodily features that we were born with that make us uncomfortable, or the social roles that we were told to play because of those bodily features.
Okay. I didn't respond to this in part 1, even though this was actually covered in the very tail end of what I was looking at in part 1, and I was just watching it back and I was thinking, oh, I should respond to this, because I think this is a really interesting statement, because it's basically grouping together two things which should not be grouped together. There's the idea of being uncomfortable with certain social roles, and then there's being uncomfortable with your body. Now, it's important to understand that there are people who genuinely are uncomfortable with their body, like anorexics, and I think like there are varying forms of OCD that mean that people are very uncomfortable with the reality of their bodies, and it stresses them out and makes them feel anxious and all that kind of stuff, which is not very good. I mean, I'm still kind of uncomfortable about a lot of aspects of my body, so there we go. It's a very obvious thing that's real, but what it is, obviously, is it's a mental health issue. If you're uncomfortable with your body, that's a mental health issue. And what's not a mental health issue is being uncomfortable with social roles that you're expected to perform. Because social roles, that's something which society is imposing on you. There's a very big difference between being upset with and rejecting something which society is imposing on you and something which is just material reality. There are a lot of ways that gender roles will feel like impositions, both to men and to women. So obviously for women, of course, they do get the kind of the worst end of patriarchy. Obviously, I mean, it's called patriarchy, but for men, there are obviously aspects of gender roles which will genuinely feel like impositions, will feel like things they have to do. They have to be strong, they have to, be dominant, they have to not show emotions and things like that. There's lots of things which a man would quite reasonably reject that are, present when it comes to patriarchal expectations of masculinity. And it's completely normal to not like that. And of course, if you're talking about women, I mean, it gets even, there are going to be plenty of women who, do not like the idea of stereotypical femininity, the idea of being submissive, the idea that they have to kind of basically pretend to be less intelligent because, they're supposed to not really fit into that role in the gender dynamic. Like, they're supposed to just be kind of emotionally vulnerable and like dependent on men and things like that. Of course, there's lots of stuff to object to there. And of course, if you talk about other activism groups, it becomes more obvious. There's lots of aspects of the kind of social roles and social situation of black people that they're going to have a quite significant problem with, which is a lot different from them having a problem with the material biological reality of their race. Like, again, you wouldn't expect to see a kind of black rights activist saying, oh, we have a problem with the social kind of a stigma against black people, the social problems, whatever kind of socioeconomic issues that black people face. And also, some of us are just uncomfortable with our black bodies. And you'd say, okay, no, I'm with you on like the first couple of things. Yeah, obviously socioeconomic discrimination against black people, that's a terrible, terrible thing. But being uncomfortable with having black bodies, that sounds like a mental health issue. And of course, yeah, you would apply it to any other example. And obviously, in this case, gender. It kind of makes me imagine if you went to a socialist meeting and there was a communist there, and the communist said, oh yeah, we reject capitalism, we object to the exploitation of the working class, we do not like the mechanism by which the surplus value, or the value of the surplus labor of the working class is extracted by the capitalist class through the control that the capitalist class has over the means of production. And also, I just hate my skin! And then he starts scouring away at it. What you would probably do is go, okay, yeah, all of the objections like the society thing, yeah, I'm on board with that. The part where you decided that you hate your skin and started angrily scouring away at it, That seems like a bit more of a mental health issue to me. And it's the same thing here, like I say. Objecting to gender roles and gender stereotypes, absolutely, totally makes sense to me. The part where you say that you want to get surgery, possibly, to correct parts of your body, that's a mental health thing, like really obviously. And it just doesn't really make sense to group them together like that. I hope I've labored that point sufficiently.
But if we understand gender as a social construct, that means those seen as women, regardless of what genitals they have, are oppressed.
Okay, so the statement there was, if we understand gender as a social construct, then people seen as men or women, or let's say anybody seen as a woman, is oppressed regardless of their genitals, and they are oppressed because they are women. Now the problem is it's based on a faulty assumption in a way, which is it's assuming that trans women are seen as women in society. And that's not true. And again, the problem is, and I've said this before, like, if this were to make sense, you'd have to be assuming that being a trans woman in some way related to material reality. So you'd have to assume that being a trans woman means presenting as a woman, right? Because I could identify as a woman and then I would be a trans woman. But that couldn't make sense because obviously I would not be perceived as a woman by society. So your argument would completely fall apart. And of course, conversely, if you're going to say that trans women, if they make an effort to present as women, even if that effort is quite unconvincing, you're going to say, oh, they're perceived as women, therefore they still experience misogyny and are still oppressed as women. You have to run into the fact that there's lots of male cross-dressers who are out and proud or whatever as men who accept the fact that they're men, they're just men who like to wear women's clothing, who would look every bit as convincing as plenty of trans women who present as women. The problem you run into is that in that case, the deciding factor would again have to be identity. Any biological male can present as a woman, but not have a transgender identity. And therefore, you would have to be arguing that what makes somebody a trans woman would be that they have a transgender identity. And that becomes a problem because, like I say, that's not a perceptible thing. Being a trans woman is not something that society can actually identify because society can't identify how you feel. Already, you've got like a very dodgy premise. This claim that if society perceives you as a woman, then that means you are a woman and that you'll experience misogyny and that you're just as oppressed as women. You're then saying that males who identify as men, who are completely comfortable identifying as men, would become oppressed as women if they're perceived by society to be women. And that is obviously complete nonsense. Now, maybe you could just say, well, you know what, the men who admit they're men but like to dress up in women's clothing, they don't count because they're inconvenient. They don't really work with the whole thing. But we're just going to talk about trans-identified males who present as feminine. And we're also going to ignore the many examples of trans-identified males who barely even make any sort of effort at all to present as women or present in a feminine way. So you're just talking about people who have a feminine gender expression and identify as women but are biologically male. Well, even within that context, you have the fact that a lot of them are not going to pass. And in the example you gave, which was again covered in part 1, it was, somebody who was obviously a biological male dressed up as a woman. And I, and most other people in society, would not perceive that person to be a woman. That's a big problem right there. Like you're acting as if these people are perceived as women, that trans-identified males are perceived as women to the extent way they're treated would be identical to how a woman is treated. And that's just completely nonsense. Like, if people can obviously tell that these individuals are not biologically female, they are not going to treat them the same way they treat biological females. You also have the problem that you're completely divorcing, you're assuming that oppression only exists in the form of how you are treated by individuals within a society, which is ignoring, first of all, the reality of how the way you're raised can affect you. It's ignoring the fact that plenty of women are going to be very seriously affected in terms of the oppression they face, really, by how they were raised. And certainly, like, a lot of women I know who've spoken about what they, reckon is the principal oppression they face, contextualize it reliably in terms of how they were raised as biological females. And, I can't say whether or not that's totally accurate. Like, obviously, I can't get a completely objective look at these women's lives, but, it's certainly something I've heard a lot. People saying, I struggle to ask for promotions at work, or ask for, to be given more leniency at work, because I wasn't really ever raised to voice my objections and to kind of be assertive when it comes to asking for better wages at work and things like that. Like, a lot of women I know just are so, they're very, let's say, biddable when it comes to their jobs. And my attitude, and the attitude of several men I know who have kind of been on the receiving end of these women and complaining about how put upon they feel at work, is like, well, why the hell do you do that? Why do you just let them tell you what to do and push you around? Because for me, it's kind of like, I haven't, you won't be surprised to know that my relationship to standard 9-to-5 jobs has been fraught, to say the least. But insofar as I've ever had a 9-to-5 job, I've been very particular about the fact it's a 9-to-5 job. The idea of somebody just saying, oh, can you just stay behind to just do work for free, is something which just, I laugh at the prospect of it. And yet my sister is constantly doing that. Not even for extra money. She just continues working significantly into the evening because, I don't know, somebody asks her to do it and she says, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I just say, like, why the hell do you do that? Like, somebody, they're paying you to do a 9-to-5 job. Why isn't it that when they say, hey, can you stay until like 6:30 to do more work, and they're not offering you any more money, why don't you just say either no or sure, pay me overtime? And she says, well, I just don't feel comfortable doing that. And it's like, I don't think you can divorce that from the reality that women are raised to not be as assertive in these things. And I think it's honestly like a tale as old as time. If there's any kind of women are from Venus, men are from Mars kind of moment, it's definitely one of the big ones that's up there, is the way that men just like are way more comfortable being like, no, why the hell would I do that for you? You're not going to do anything for me. Whereas women tend to be a lot more like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Yeah. And again, obviously, there's always going to be examples of people who buck the trend. But the point I'm making is that you can't really divorce, therefore, women's oppression from the way women are socialized. And I say that because, heck, like, the reality is that the existence of modern oppression for women does not usually take the form of kind of actively sexist men demanding things of women in kind of overtly patriarchal language. Like, it's not so much that men will actively treat women in a discriminatory way. Obviously that happens, but I'd say a lot of oppression isn't like that. A lot of oppression is more like men ask things of women, and that's when the kind of internalized misogyny, the reality of how women were raised, comes into play. And obviously, I guess this is why radical feminism is kind of inconvenient for trans-identified people, because I think radical feminism focuses on that a lot. The fact that, you look at kind of choice feminism, which is of course nonsense. Choice feminism being the idea that if a woman makes a choice, it's automatically like empowering and things like that. And obviously the radical feminist point would be, well, no, actually women can make choices which are harmful. And what that is assuming is that women can be not even remotely put upon by patriarchy, that patriarchy can make no demands of women, and yet women by their own choices will still continue patriarchal oppression because of the way they've been socialized, the misogyny they've internalized. And that's like basically, a pretty basic radical feminist point. And again, that's a point which would completely contradict this idea that if you're just perceived to be a woman by somebody, even if, and again, like I'm ignoring the fact that, like these obviously trans-identified males are usually not going to be perceived as actual women. But even if that were the case, they still wouldn't have been socialized. They still wouldn't have had that really core component of misogyny, which is the socialization. Also, you're completely ignoring the reality of just systemic oppression in general. Like you're just assuming that oppression exists in the form of, like I say, interpersonal interactions, which is, like that's like the logic of the movie Crash, which isn't a good movie, where you just think, well, it's like that's what racism is, when a racist person meets a black person and racism happens. Like, no, almost all forms of oppression exist in terms of like quite impersonal forces. So yeah, this idea that it's about like how you're perceived on an individual level is complete nonsense. And yeah, all of that is assuming, making the incredibly insane assumption that we're talking about a trans-identified male who is being perceived as genuinely like 100% a woman. And obviously, the less true that is, and I would kind of say it's like a spectrum of like passing, the less true that is. Ooh, why did I do that to you? The less true that is, the less the logic here, the logic presented by Jessie would apply. And obviously, even in the case when it applies the most, where you would say, oh, they're going to be perceived as women by a lot of people, even still, you don't have the systemic aspect, and you don't have the reality of having been raised as a biological female, which I actually think even Jessie, like earlier on, made it quite clear that that is quite a significant part of being a man or a woman. The way you are raised to, based on your genitals, you're either identified as a man or identified as a woman based on your genitals. So yeah, it's a bad argument.
That trans women and cis women are still harmed because they are women.
Now, I would say a very basic rule of thumb, when you make any kind of statement, is to think, what would be the kind of obvious alternative to that statement? So in this case, for example, the claim is that if you are a trans-identified male, then the oppression you experience is because you are a woman. So the obvious alternative would be to say, well, actually, the oppression you experience is because you are a gender non-conforming male. And obviously a gender critical person would say a gender non-conforming man. That is the obvious alternative explanation. And then you have to ask the question, which one of those explanations makes the most sense? Does it make sense to say a trans-identified male experiences misogyny because of being a woman? Or does it make sense to say that a trans-identified male experiences misogyny because of being a gender non-conforming man? And the first thing I'll point out, and I point this out every single time, is the fact that you look at a gender non-conforming man. The already aforementioned example of somebody who identifies as a man, completely admits to being a man, but is a cross-dresser. The oppression of a trans-identified male is very often going to be identical to the oppression experienced by a male cross-dresser, because perceptibly they are literally identical. The overwhelming majority of oppression that trans-identified males are going to experience is going to be because of being gender non-conforming. And at least Jessie, gender, should have made some effort, recognizing surely that that is the other alternative explanation. If you're just going to say, oh, well, actually, trans-identified males must be oppressed because of being a woman, you'd have to recognize the obvious alternative, that they're oppressed because they're gender non-conforming men. And then surely you'd have to explain why that isn't true. And I don't think you can explain why that isn't true, because I think it's kind of self-evidently obvious that that's what the majority of oppression trans-identified males likely to face. And again, going back to the example that was seen in part 1 of the person walking down the street, it was Jessie, gender, walking down the street dressed up as a woman. My first thought would be, and the first thing I would identify, and I think the first thing lots of other people would identify, is, oh, that is a gender non-conforming male. That is a man dressing up as a woman. And therefore, if I had any kind of bigoted attitudes, it would be based on that. When you look at the fact that one of the problems which lots of people talk about when it comes to trans-identified males is that if they kind of take a guy home and then the guy discovers they have a penis, there's a chance the guy will react violently to that. They'll say, oh, it's a penis, I wasn't expecting this. And then violence incurs, which is of course horrendous and, disgusting, and obviously any man who uses violence against anyone in any context should obviously be arrested and, probably go to prison and a very long time if indeed the violence, goes so far as murder. But it's worth pointing out that what you're describing there is somebody being attacked because they have a penis. And I think, seeing as that's probably like a very kind of quintessential example of violent oppression that trans-identified males are likely to face, violence when it is revealed that they are in fact a biological male, and a man who feels threatened because of his sexuality or whatever else responds to that with violence. That's a very common kind of go-to example of like how trans-identified males can experience violence. In that example, they are literally being oppressed. They're on the receiving end of violence because they're biologically male. So how can you come out of that and then say the oppression they experience is because they're women? If they were women, that wouldn't happen. Like, this is such an obvious point. Okay. If you're talking about, and I just bring this up because it is one of the like go-to examples of, if you want to talk about, like I remember there was recently people were talking about the oppression that J.K. Rowling was experiencing. And there were so many examples being posted of like, trans-identified males being murdered. Like in the tweets, like lots of trans activists were kind of trying to take away from the significance of the harassment J.K. Rowling is facing. With like, there was like one person just tweeting like, this trans-identified male was murdered here, blah, blah, blah. Just going through example, I guess trying to show that like J.K. Rowling's, the harassment of her didn't matter because, trans-identified males are being killed. But yeah, it's very obvious that one of the massive reasons why trans-identified males are routinely killed is because of the threat that they present to biological males, or heterosexual males, I should say, to their sexuality. Man hooks up with who he believes to be a woman, goes home, finds out that it's in fact a biological male, and then there is violence. A woman would find that actually that encounter would hopefully go significantly better because the man wouldn't find a penis. He wouldn't find any evidence that the person who he thought was a woman is in fact biologically male, because this person wouldn't be biologically male. The example that is very frequently given of transgender oppression is literally an example of trans-identified males facing violence because they are perceived to not be women. So how can you argue that the oppression of trans-identified males comes from them being perceived as women, when a very commonly cited example of oppression against trans-identified males literally comes from the fact that they are not perceived to be women? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, like basically to me, it's very obvious that when you're talking about oppression against trans-identified males, it's not happening because they are women. It's happening because they are perceived to be effeminate, or in other ways, gender non-conforming men. And then obviously you have the standard fact that if a biological male is trans-identified and does not present as a woman, you're not going to have any kind of discrimination there, because there's not even going to be anything perceptible for people to discriminate against. So yeah, basically it's such an obviously wrong statement, because it's just like, just look at the way that, like, it's so obvious that biological males who go out and wear dresses are being discriminated against because they're biological males wearing dresses, not because they're women. Even if they identify as a woman, they aren't women, and they're not being discriminated against because they're women.
Now, no one is saying that trans and cis women face the exact same kinds of harm. For example, cis women have to fight for access for their bodily autonomy rights to things like abortions or things like that, while trans women have to fight for things like gender-affirming surgeries. These are two distinctly different fights with two distinctly different communities.
They're very different, aren't they? In one scenario, you have women fighting for rights relating to the fact that they are inescapably biologically female. You know, the fight for women to have bodily autonomy when it comes to abortion or contraception relates to the fact that women inescapably have wombs and tend to quite often be, I guess, at risk of getting pregnant, which obviously if they don't want to get pregnant, that's a problem. And then you run into an issue of, can you morally justify the idea that a woman is basically locked into having her body be used to keep another human being alive for 9 months? That is the question. And that's a very specific issue to being a woman, to being biologically female. And then you just say, well, conversely, trans-identified males have to fight for being allowed to turn their penis inside out. And it's like, those are different, that's true. But like, the problem is, I mean, I guess the issue is that what Jessie basically said is that those are very different fights. But it was said as though, like, this is just like, oh, they're kind of different, like they're not identical. And it's like, no, they're completely diametrically opposed. One is about trying to mitigate the oppression that extends from the inescapable reality of one's biological sex. And the other one is literally about trying to pretend that you can change the reality of your biological sex by, having surgical intervention in your biologically male body. And it's like, those aren't the same things. They're not in the same ballpark. What I'm kind of hoping is that I cut Jessie off too soon and we're now going to get like an explanation of, but here's why they're actually very similar. Because obviously, you can't just say, oh yeah, these two things aren't identical, then list two completely, radically different things which fundamentally describe diametrically opposed human experiences. And then turn around and just like not. So hopefully there's going to be an explanation like, but here's why they're similar.
But both trans and cis women also face very similar fights because we are women. We face higher rates of sexual abuse, discrimination in the workplace.
Okay, wait, I'm just going to pause for a second. First of all, since it was pointed out already, that line about trans and Swiss women, I really stress myself out about my enunciation, like especially when I really hate reading scripts because I just find like that I just can't say things right. And even at the beginning of this video, I felt like my enunciation just wasn't really on point. And if anyone isn't aware of this, and I don't know if that's not necessarily the case, I know I have a relatively international audience. The difference between enunciation and pronunciation is that pronunciation is basically about how you actively try to pronounce the words. So if you say, for example, epitome instead of epitome, that's mispronunciation because you have actively tried, you've not stumbled over your words, you've actively tried to pronounce the word epitome wrong because you mispronounced it. I say that because I used to say epitome because I'd only ever read it in books before, and then somebody corrected me, and I was like, oh god. Anyway, enunciation, conversely, is when you know how a word should be pronounced, but you fail to configure your mouth in the kind of proper way to pronounce it properly. And yeah, so it's kind of just like, the example I always give is the way Kendrick Lamar raps. Everyone says he's a good rapper. He literally cannot enunciate words properly.
Girl, I know you want that.
And I'm not like one of those people who's like, oh, mumble rap is for losers. But I just think to myself, like, I mean, first of all, Kendrick Lamar isn't even classified as mumble rap, but it's just like, it genuinely sounds like he's got like a mouthful of marbles or something. It's not okay. Also, to be honest, I don't even like that many of his songs. I think You, it's just the letter U is a good song, and I think that what's the other one? That one about like the Jamaican thing. Oh, the Black of the Berry. That's a pretty good one. You know, I mean, overall, I'd say it's fine. I don't know. I don't buy into the hype with Kendrick Lamar. And I'm kind of glad that people don't really talk about Kendrick Lamar anymore. Like, I remember back in like 2015, everyone was going mental. They're like, oh, Kendrick Lamar's the best rapper ever. I was like, I mean, he's fine. You should probably learn to say words properly. Oh, that was ironic. I just stumbled over my own words. What an idiot. But anyway, the point is that I have noticed that Jessie has some issues with enunciation and has repeatedly said the wrong sounds at several points in this video for the words, which is, you know, like fine. And obviously I don't think it's an issue, but it just makes me kind of realize like I really beat myself up about it too much. Like I just get so stressed out when I'm trying to say a word and I just like keep completely failing with the sounds I'm supposed to be saying. And yet it seems like if I just powered through, I could still be as successful a YouTuber as Jessie Gender. And that's my ultimate goal. You know what? I've completely forgotten what the thing is I was even responding to. So let's go back.
Same kinds of harm. For example, cis women have to fight for access for their bodily autonomy rights to things like abortions or things like that.
Sorry, I just want to give an example. The way autonomy, it was like autonomous rights. It's fine. But again, I'm just saying like this is what I mean about the whole enunciation thing. It's fine, but like it's very obvious, and it just makes me think. I guess what I'm saying is, it's anything, it's kind of an inspiring message, because it's like if you feel like you aren't very good at enunciating things and not very good at like public speaking and you stumble over your words a lot. It's kind of funny. Every single time I mention it, I keep like accidentally jinxing it and doing it myself. Then here's the evidence that you can just totally kind of do whatever. I mean, also Kendrick Lamar, again, like we say, you don't have to be able to say words properly in order to succeed in life. And I think that's actually quite a beautiful thing.
While trans women have to fight for things like gender-affirming surgeries. These are two distinctly different fights with two distinctly different communities. But both trans and cis women also face very similar fights because we are women.
Okay, yeah, so the point is, one, we have not got any, so basically the argument isn't like that there is a similarity in any sense between the biological fights, or like those, you know, the fights for women's reproductive rights, and in contrast to the fights of trans-identified people to be able to get changes to their body and, you know, try to alter the signifiers of their biological sex. Instead, it's just saying, but here are some areas where it's similar. Which, of course, I mean, you know, there's always going to be lots of areas where it's similar. You know, like, obviously, you know, all human beings are going to have some areas of similarity, but let's hear what the specific areas of similarity are.
We face higher rates of sexual abuse, discrimination in the workplace, and even more because we are women. And
again, okay, so higher rates of sexual abuse and issues in the workplace because they are women. Now, discrimination in the workplace because they're women. Well, again, I would point out the obvious fact that I already gave an example of how I think one of the areas where women really suffer in the workplace is in areas relating to how they are socialized to behave. You know, there is a reason why women, like, I think we're all clear on the fact, like, just to clarify, we're all clear on the fact that one of the main reasons why women have, like, why there is a wage gap, is because women tend not to ask for wage, promotions and raises and things like that. Like, women tend not to push for raises as much as men do. And the obvious explanation for that is socialization. So, one of like literally like the wage gap, which is, you know, a classic example of discrimination in the workplace, that's caused principally at this point because, like, I think, yeah, we are all clear on the fact that legally a company cannot just say, well, we're going to pay her less because she's a woman. But what they can do is say, well, we're going to pay that man more because he asked for a higher wage, because he demanded a higher wage. And conversely, if women don't feel comfortable asking for higher wages because of how they're socialized, then they're going to end up with lower wages. Now, obviously, there are, you know, the wage gap is kind of a multifaceted thing. There are other different examples of why women will overall, like, why there is a wage gap. And if you genuinely are not aware of that, then get over it. Like, the denying the wage gap, that's old school. That's old school anti-feminism. New school anti-feminism is pretending that men can be women. But yeah, basically, there's all sorts of reasons, but a very big reason, and possibly I would argue the predominant reason, is that men tend to be more comfortable asking for raises and asking for higher wages than women are. So the point is that is a massive area of discrimination in the workplace, where the fact that trans-identified males were not raised women is significantly to their advantage. So when it comes to discrimination in the workplace, I mean, you'd have to be more specific with the exact examples you're talking about to see whether or not you could say like, oh, those are happening. Again, like the big issue is it's obviously begging the question anyway to say like, oh, this is oppression that's happening because they are women. But I guess you can take it as it's happening in a way that suggests that they are perceived as women and, you know, would rightly be understood as women, which is basically what I would doubt. And obviously on the sexual assault thing, well, I literally did a whole thing about how like sexual violence against trans women or trans-identified males is frequently a result of the anger at discovering that trans-identified males are in fact not women. And of course, yeah, you have the problem that like effeminate men in a variety of contexts are likely to face sexual violence from other men. So you've got like, there's lots of problems with this argument that the fact that trans-identified males face sexual violence suggests they're women. I think that's complete nonsense.
Trans people, men, women, or non-binary, will also face added challenges because we're trans, like extra laws that relegate trans bodies. But bringing this back to the trans exclusionary radical.
Okay, sorry. So, and then you have, so basically, when you break it down, you have, in the claim that the oppression that trans-identified males face suggests they're women, you have three dimensions to that. Firstly, a list of, or an explanation of the fighting for certain rights relating to kind of biological sex, where women and trans-identified males have literally diametrically opposed goals. Then you have two mentions, or a mention of two different areas where there is some actual oppression, which is sexual violence and employment discrimination, where even still, the examples of how the two experiences of these things are going to be radically different for trans-identified males in contrast to biological females is very obvious. And then you have, and by the way, I should also point out that it's worth mentioning, trans-identified females, they don't identify out of employment discrimination. You know, like, nor sexual violence, actually, for that matter. Yeah, like, have fun. I mean, you know, like, obviously I don't want to sound kind of callous about it because obviously it's a serious issue. But I'm telling you right now that if you look at areas where there's a lot of very bad sexual violence, like kind of places globally where there are lots of really bad sexual violence, if you are if you like cut your hair short as a biological female and kind of present like, you know, a lot of the biological females who, you know, consider themselves men, the trans-identified biological females, there we go. If you do what they do and then go out into these parts of the world, I think you're going to find that you would still experience sexual violence in the exact same way that you would be likely to if you identified as a woman, because I don't think most men who are likely to perpetuate sexual violence, or perpetuate, is that the word I'm looking for? There's actually a different word I'm looking for, but I can't think of what it is. Anyway, I don't think they care how you identify. Sorry. I know that's like I mean, it sucks that there's any kind of sexual violence going on, but we need to be realistic about what the actual causes of that sexual violence are. And yeah, men, when they engage in acts of sexual violence, not go, oh, by the way, just to clarify, how do you identify? Just so I can be clear, because, you know, like, no, that just doesn't happen. And then the third example given was also trans-identified people have lots of completely different things they have to fight for, which are totally unrelated to what biological females have to fight for, like the ability to be recognized as the gender that they identify as. So basically, yeah, in your example of trans-identified males having similar experiences to women, you've literally that's it. Like, two of the main things you listed are examples of how their experiences are totally different to the experiences of women, and then the other two are areas where I guess there's some overlap, but it's still very fundamentally different.
The patriarchy, which oppresses those who are assigned a gender of woman or something other outside of man at birth, something that is typically assigned to us, as we said, based on our genitals at birth. But TERFs are a subset of radical feminism that fundamentally misunderstands this point.
Okay, bold move saying fundamentally misunderstands, because I really do not think that Jessie has given any indication of the ability to properly identify when other people are misunderstanding things. And yeah, I mean, for the record, I mean, what's being described there, yeah, is a rejection of the, well, I mean, I think it was an accurate description, kind of like understanding that culturally, the idea that somebody was born with a penis or a vagina should not reflect how they are perceived kind of socially. It should not kind of be this big thing of like men and women and man essences and woman essences, which obviously does result in the construction of patriarchy, which allows for the oppression of biological females. And obviously, you know, like disadvantages in some ways biological males as well. But yeah, let's see how this is being misunderstood.
And I want to say this up front, that not all radical feminists are trans-exclusionary, the T part of the equation. TERFs are people who oppose the self-definition of transgender people and gender as a social construct, and who root their feminism and their view of gender and that view of...
Sorry. Okay, let's just, I don't know, it's a bit rambly, so let's just clarify one thing. TERFs, or gender-critical feminists, don't really oppose the idea of gender as a social construct, because TERFs understand, and again I'm saying TERFs because it's the term being used, so pardon me, but understand gender as being gender roles and gender stereotypes. So they would of course recognize that as a social construct. Now, there is a question of, does the category of man and woman exist as a social construct? Now, that is a bit more of a debate, I would say. It's not something that has to be rejected. And what I mean by saying it doesn't have to be rejected is, race is a social construct. Race is 100% undeniably a social construct. There is no reason why you arbitrarily say, oh, these people are black, but these people, you know, they're kind of dark-skinned, but they're not black. And Jews look a lot like white people, but actually we're going to say that Jews are different. Jews aren't actually white people. And Arabs look quite a lot like, you know, quite genetically similar and related to Jews, but they're a different race. You have all of these, like, and, you know, obviously, like, you know, lots of Mediterranean people, they all look very kind of similar ethnically. Like, a lot of Jordanians look like Spanish people and stuff like that. Persians look quite a bit like Italians, but you say, no, for some reason they're different. You know, I do this every single time. Like, I just point out because there are so many examples you can point to. Race is a social construct. We made it up. But you can still make firm, definitive statements about who belongs to what race. Very easily. Gender identity extremists love to point to transracialism and say, that's not what gender identity ideology teaches. You know, being transgender is nothing like being transracial. And yet being transracial is undeniably a social construct. So, point being, everybody agrees that you can admit that things are social constructs, and yet not then argue that those things can just be changed around willy-nilly according to how one personally feels about it. I don't care if somebody personally feels that they're black. That's not what being black is. Likewise, even if being a woman were a social construct, it doesn't matter. It still has a definition, and that definition isn't whoever feels that they are a woman. So you don't need to reject the idea that gender, whether it's understood as gender stereotypes and gender roles, or understood as simply the categories of man and woman, you do not need to reject that it is a social construct in order to be trans-exclusionary.
They don't see gender as a social construct, but that if you're born with a penis, you're a man, and if you're born with a vagina, you're a woman, no matter what. Nothing can change that, period, end of statement. Even
that does not contradict being a social construct. Guess what? Being black is a social construct, and yet if you're born with black skin to parents of African ancestry, then you are black. Nothing can change that. It's purely based in biological reality. So, yeah, you can acknowledge things as social constructs and still believe that they are basically immutable facts about who you are. So, yeah, just wanted to point out that you do not understand what a social construct is.
Even if you look like a woman, were treated like a woman by everyone else in society, no matter what, you are a man if you were born with a penis. and for intersex folks who may have been born with ambiguous genitalia or both are generally left out of their discussions completely, or whenever they are discussed with whatever sex they were forced to assign with at birth.
No. First of all, they're not left out of our discussions. Usually, people with differences of sexual development, tiny minority, and therefore it's just irritating to like have it constantly brought up because it's a red herring most of the time. Like the questions really is about what does it mean to be a man or woman in the context of talking about the clearly defined categories of biological male and biological female. And usually the response is just to bring up as a red herring, what about intersex people? You know, they're not clearly defined as biologically male or biologically female, and that's just a waste of everybody's time. That's why it's not focused on. When it is discussed, it's discussed in terms of the reality that, and you know, I've discussed it in this context, lots of other people have discussed it in this context too, that these are differences of sexual development that affect males and females. That whether you're a male or whether you're a female, you can have differences of sexual development. And to be honest, if you want to start talking about secondary sexual characteristics, then you could say that maybe all males and all females have to some extent differences of sexual development. The point is that these differences of sexual development do not change fundamentally whether or not you're a male or female, and that there is no such thing as an intersex person, and nobody is forced to be assigned, you know, a particular sex at birth. Biological reality is what makes somebody have a particular sex. You know, there is no way around the fact that if you are if you are of the phenotype centered around large gamete production, you're a woman. If you're of the phenotype centered around small gamete production, you are a male. And there is nobody centered around either who has the phenotype centered around the production of both gametes, neither gamete, or a third gamete. And if you want to check out the debate between Rubble of Empires and Avi on this, it's kind of funny because there is a bit where Avi literally like says, well, hypothetically, there could be a third gamete, even though we've never actually found one, and therefore it's not a binary. But it's nonsense. Yeah, the reality is that intersex, you can use the term if you like, but it doesn't mean somebody who is between the two sexes, because there is no between the two sexes.
And so already we see the tension between the transgender community and TERFs. If trans people see gender as a social construct, with there being women...
I'm kind of interested in this, so let's see. How gender works. Human. Men, trans cis. Women, trans cis. Non-binary, trans cis. So yeah, obviously, I guess non-binary cis, there is a asterisk. I can't really read it, but I guess it's probably referring to like the nonsense idea of being biologically intersex. So there we go. Like already, that's not a real thing. But yeah, okay. So that's how gender works. It's whatever.
Man and non-binary genders, and men can be trans or cis. TERFs see gender this way: that there are men and trans women are a form of man, and that there are women and trans men are a form of that.
Yes. It illustrates a harmful ideology, however, it attempts to at least use trans-affirming language. I find it really funny. But yeah, okay.
But in many ways, this sort of structure isn't all that dissimilar to any person who opposes transgender self-identification says about transgender person. What separates TERFs, though, more is how they have fundamentally misunderstood that radical feminist idea and larger feminist ideals of the patriarchy.
Okay, so first of all, it is true that, yeah, like most people would understand like that's how it works. Like basically anyone who accepts biological reality would obviously agree with the gender critical understanding of the situation. So there you go. But yeah, I do find it funny how like there was an attempt to not use the terms like, because yeah, it implies that like gender critical people think that trans women are a subset of men, when the reality is gender critical people more accurately think that trans women don't really exist because the entire term is completely nonsensical. But whatever. Anyway, so yeah, apparently we still haven't got this misunderstanding explained. Like it was a while ago that the fact there was a misunderstanding was brought up, and we still haven't got there. So let's see if we can get there before the end of this recording session.
Talk about that power structure of men and women as oppressing and oppressed classes. We can't talk about how women are harmed without that. But for TERFs, they have essentialized genitals and bodies as the determining factor of this worldview. And because they state that trans women are men, they focus on that fact and state that all trans women...
Sorry. I just need to slightly nitpick. What do you mean that they understand genitals as the determining factor? I don't think anyone believes that it's actually the presence of the penis itself which causes violence and things like that. So I just want to, I'm wondering what exactly that means, because it's not very clearly defined. If you're suggesting that gender critical people think that the genitals themselves are what causes violence, then that is complete nonsense. So yeah, I'm not sure what you're saying. I will go back and make sure that, because I was kind of thrown off by that, and I want to make sure I didn't miss anything, too intelligent.
But for TERFs, they have essentialized genitals and bodies as the determining factor of this worldview. And because they state that trans women are men, they focus on that fact and state that all trans women are oppressors, and trans men are solely victims of the patriarchy, have no agency in their own choices.
Okay, so first of all, it says because trans women have penises, trans-identified males have penises, that means that they're the oppressor. Well, no, it would be more accurate to say because they're biologically male. You are the one who is choosing to make this solely about genitals. The reality is more about being biologically male or biologically female, which is slightly more complicated than just genitals. That's mistake number one. And then the second thing is saying they're automatically part of this oppressive class. Well, again, yeah, accounting for, and this is something that you already acknowledged, the fact that obviously being part of an oppressive class is not as simplistic as just saying every single member of that class is actively oppressing every single member of the oppressed class all the time, then yeah, I would basically agree with that. And then the final thing you said is that trans-identified females have no agency in their choices, and they're part it was a bit of a strange thing to say, because by that logic, are you saying that whenever anybody believes that there is such a thing as an oppressed class, they have no agency in their choices? I don't understand what you're saying. You seem to have just added that completely onto it. What does that mean? I'm gonna go again. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go back and listen to that again because I need.
Men are men. They focus on that fact and state that all trans women are oppressors, and trans men are solely victims of the patriarchy, have no agency in their own choices. But that gets us to...
Okay. They have no agency in their own choices. What are you talking about? It seems like what you're saying is that you're inferring because of the existence of the patriarchy, you're saying that women don't have any choices. Because there's no aspect of understanding that biological reality exists in the case of trans-identified females, and they are in fact biologically female. No aspect of that means that they don't have any choices. You seem to just be inferring that because there is the belief in an oppressed class and an oppressive system, that automatically means that the victims of that oppression must not have any agency or choices, which would therefore seem to logically conclude that you can never affirm the existence of any kind of oppression without arguing that the people who are oppressed do not have... why did you... What are you saying? Why are you singling it out for this particular case? This would be like saying that all black rights activists, black liberation activists, whatever you want to call them, because they believe that there is an oppression against black people, therefore believe that black people have no agency and no choices. Is that what you would say? What about as people who... Gay rights activists? Gay rights activists believe that gay people are oppressed, therefore they believe that gay people have no rights or no ability, or no agency and no choices. Is that what you're saying? That sounds like it's what you're saying, and that's completely ridiculous.
TERF's dogmatic focus on this idea that trans women are oppressors and predators, and trans men are victims without agency, is what lies at the root of their harm.
It's not dogmatic. It's reality. The dogmatic idea that males have oppressed females.
It's not that they see the power structure system of men and oppressors and women as oppressed. It's that they see trans people as active, harmful agents in this fight. As if trans women specifically, who they see as their male oppressors, are directly trying to attack cisgender women by virtue of their being trans.
Okay. Two things. Firstly, there are all sorts of different reasons, I think, why people are trans-identified. From being, trenders to being actively, like, yeah, sure, actively trying to subvert, like, female-only spaces, to having genuine mental health problems, to being autogynephilic and it being a fetish. There's lots of different reasons why it's the case, and I think a lot of times it's going to be different reasons in combination and things like that. So, there is no, I don't think anyone who says, like, oh, it's always autogynephilia, or it's always people trying, you know, like men trying to get into women's prisons, or it's always transgenders. Anyone who says that, I would say, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think you can say, like, it's always, because the reality is, like, that's kind of the point. Like, one of the reasons why trans identity is such an analytically useless concept is because there's such a massive variety of reasons why somebody could be trans-identified. The second point was this claim that, like, they're harmful just for existing. Well, the reality is that the entire ideology that their existence is premised upon is anti-feminist and is part of perpetuating the sexism that women face in society. So, yes, there we go. In some sense, yeah, the very existence of, or alleged existence of trans-identified people presumes the existence of this idea that being a woman, being a man is just an idea in your head. It's just some kind of woman essence or man essence. That's a fundamentally anti-feminist idea. Yeah, sure, that is harmful to women.
And as a result, TERFs frame everything about transgender people in this active, attacking, and fear-mongering way.
All transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves. However, the transsexually constructed lesbian feminist violates women's sexuality and spirit as well. Rape, although it is usually done by force, can also be accomplished by deception.
Well, this is unambiguously true. If you have sex with somebody under false pretenses, that's rape. And yeah, it's definitely true that if you are aware that somebody who you might want to be in a relationship with is going to be attracted to a particular sex, and you pretend to be that sex when you're not, that's rape. Like, how is it not? How is it not? Like, I mean, yeah, literally, like, if you, I mean, I'm thinking about in Revenge of the Nerds, when the guy pretends to be the girl's boyfriend and then has sex with her, that's rape. Because he's pretending to be something he's not. So yeah, like, there's nothing wrong with this statement. You know, like, I think Janice Raymond, you know, she didn't phrase things the most diplomatic way, but, you know, you gotta respect just being truthful about things. And, you know, like, definitely it's true that, like, both things said here, like the fact that ultimately you're reducing a woman's body to something which you can just kind of signify in a kind of superficial way. That's, well, you know, I mean, like, rape obviously is kind of almost like, I guess it's almost like poetic language when you use, like, terms like that, but there's no ambiguity to it when you're talking about having sex with women who want to have sex with women by pretending to be a woman. There's no ambiguity about that being rape.
TERFs say things like, trans women are men and all men are rapists, therefore all trans women are rapists.
Well, maybe, but that's not what was that was not what was said in the quote. Like, you basically showed a quote which made a particular argument and then stated something which isn't what the thing you just quoted said. That makes no sense. The argument of Janice Raymond was not that all men are rapists and all trans women are men, therefore all trans women are rapists. You know, like, the whole, like, all men are rapists thing, which I think, you know, like, it's something which is, like, a bit complicated. But I think the long story short is that nobody really believes that. There are some, you know, takes about, like, exactly, I guess you say, like, the relationship between men and, like, rape as a kind of systemic aspect of women's oppression. But definitely nobody's arguing that, like, all men are kind of, in a literal sense, rapists. Because, you know, obviously, like, I think, you know, I mean, I don't really want to get into that too much. But basically, let's suffice it to say that a lot of gender-critical feminists would not say that all men are rapists. But they would say that if a trans-identified male says that he is a woman and then has sex with a lesbian, then that's rape. Because it's rape by deception, which is unambiguously a form of rape. So, yeah, but the point is that, yeah, the argument was not that, in literally the quote you just gave, the argument was not because all men are rapists, therefore all trans-identified women are rapists. In fact, to be honest, I don't think the argument, even by Janice Raymond, was that all trans-identified males who consider themselves lesbians are rapists. Of course, it's entirely possible that a trans-identified male will consistently tell women with whom they want to sleep that they are in fact a biological male, and obviously in that case, well, he's not using deception, so it's not rape. So far in trying to represent gender critical beliefs, you've literally put up a quote and then failed to properly communicate what that quote is saying. So that doesn't really give a good sign for how well you're going to be able to communicate the gender critical ideas when you don't have a literal quote in front of you for you to misrepresent.
I am so glad that TERFs understand the basic idea of math and the transitive property, but we're talking about a different type of trans. Maybe that's where they got things confused.
Good. It's really good after you've completely failed to understand a quote to then try to act cocky about like some kind of mathematical like concept and stuff. And be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't try to act smart after you've just been like, well, this person said that reducing the being biologically female to just a series of empty signifiers and then pretending to be a woman in order to try to have sex with lesbians is akin to rape. So that must be saying that because all men are rapists, therefore all trans-identified males must be rapists as well. Yeah, after that, you probably don't want to then try to seem like you're the person who's really intelligent.
One of the ways that they frame their fear-mongering tactics is that they argue that trans women are just men pretending to be women to invade women's spaces and harm women. We see this.
Okay, two things. One, what is this accent? Is it supposed to be an English accent? Because it sounds kind of more like just like the accent that Americans do when they're trying to be like upper class, which is fine, I guess, but like what's the deal with like I don't really get it. Like I'm a bit confused because this character is holding a J.K. Rowling book, but then is also clearly being critical of gender critical people. So what's the character? Is this character supposed to be a gender critical feminist? Anyway, claim that, yeah, well, again, like not all trans-identified males are trying to do that, but some are. Like, in fact, we literally know, like, there was literally a study, I'll see if I can find it, about how many so-called, like, trans women, trans-identified males in prison who get transferred to women's prisons then stop identifying as women after they've got out of prison. There's no ambiguity here. It happens. And don't deny it, or else you're a misogynist.
This, for example, in one J.K. Rowling's essay, Robert Galbraith's essay, where she...
Is that supposed to be some kind of joke? I don't really know what the joke is, but whatever.
Espoused and supported the TERF viewpoint argument that allowing trans women into women's restrooms will let men pretend to be women in order to get into the women's restroom and rape them.
Yes, it will. There's no ambiguity to that. You're literally, like, what you're describing is exactly what would happen. How is, like, literally what you're saying is that there is no ambiguity to the fact that saying we should let trans-identified males into women's changing rooms is effectively saying we should let men into women's changing rooms. Because there is no meaningful distinction between a trans-identified male and a non-trans-identified male, seeing as identity itself is just something you can just make up. And then, yeah, we've got this quote from Rowling. Let's see if there is any attempt to actually refute it.
Is the place where you're going to be attacked. But let me be clear. Clear? Suddenly became Irish here. But...
Wait, I'm sorry. So is this supposed to be an English accent? Because it's... It's not an English accent at all. And to be honest, I don't think that wasn't a very good Irish accent either. I I will say there's kind of an irony about a trans-identified male being very bad at imitating people. But no, yeah, so basically, let's just say, so wait, hold on, okay. Where are we going from here? I don't think that, like, basically the thing that was said, it hadn't really been, like, a point. There wasn't a response. Let's just clarify. There was not a response so far. So, we'll see if there is a response. But so far, like, I was kind of like, some things were said. I was thinking about, like, I understand this fear and blah, blah, blah. But there hasn't actually been really kind of, like, a response to it.
Let me be clear. No matter what rights you give to women, assault and abuse will still be and always have been illegal. If, for example...
Like, it's really disturbing to me to consider the fact that this is supposed to be remotely an English accent, which I don't know, maybe it's not, but like the whole like, oh, I'm suddenly sounding Irish makes it sound as if like an accent is being attempted here. To me, this mostly sounds like Hank Green from the Vlogbrothers. Like, that is who this sounds like to me.
A man does claim to be a trans woman and enters a bathroom and assaults a woman, that is a thing that can be prosecuted criminally. But on top of all of...
Okay, so basically the argument is that obviously the actual so the entry of men into women's spaces is neither here nor there. The point is that in any event, no matter the situation, if a man assaults a woman, that will always be prosecuted, or that is still against the law, and therefore there's not really a problem. Which, in some sense, there is like a logic there. Obviously, you could say like, oh, it's kind of callous to be like, well, why would you're putting the woman in a situation where she could be assaulted. But I guess you could say, well, like the best thing you can do when it comes to assault is prosecute people once it happens. Like the best defense against the best defense against a crime is to say, well, when you do that crime, you will be prosecuted for it. That's fine. It ignores the fact that obviously a lot of women are uncomfortable with men. Like there are crimes sex crimes really, that you can do, which are not necessarily going to directly affect somebody. Like an obvious example would be like upskirting. Like upskirting, certainly in the UK, I think became illegal. And obviously like nowadays, like it used to be something like, it's kind of gross. It used to be like literally when I was first getting on Reddit, for example, I remember like there was the upskirt subreddit and things like that. When you just look at that, it's very obvious how there are, and I would say upskirting is unambiguously a sex crime, even if you just take the picture yourself for your own viewing pleasure. It's still a crime, but it's not really a crime that can be prosecuted. So that's the situation we're in right now. Like, there are lots of things which would still be like very wrong for you to do, and like it's basically about violating somebody else's boundaries where you can't necessarily be realistically prosecuted for it. And that's a problem with allowing biological males into women's spaces and just saying, well, you can just get in there, have a crack at it. If you can do anything to make the women feel violated or uncomfortable, just make sure you don't do anything that can actually get you directly prosecuted.
Of that, there have been no recorded cases of trans women assaulting people and women in the bathroom.
Oh boy, okay. I think what I'm going to do is just see if I can confirm. I'm just going to do a bit of, like, again, obviously I don't kind of go into this with notes, especially in case like this where I'm watching it blind, which I think I already admitted I'm doing, but I'm just going to really come back to this. Okay, so apparently there have been no recorded cases of so-called trans women assaulting women in restrooms or bathrooms or whatever American term we're using to refer to toilets. The first thing I want to point out is that to make a distinction between being a trans woman and being a man does just seem a bit bizarre to me when the only thing that apparently substantiates that difference is one's say-so. Because obviously there are plenty of men who have assaulted women in toilets, but apparently that doesn't count because they don't say that they're women. And apparently saying you're a woman, that makes a very big difference. I'm not really sure how it's supposed to. But I do just want to point out that this is nonsense. There are cases of, so-called trans women assaulting women in toilets. Now, this first one's a little different in that it's not technically an assault in a toilet, but it is something which is invading somebody else's privacy, and it's something which obviously is a way that you are making people feel uncomfortable. So, and it's this story here about one Lee Baker / Tiffany Aking. And apparently this person's Twitter account consists mostly of photos of women in underwear, plus posting photos from female toilets. So this is obviously something which would make women feel incredibly uncomfortable, knowing that any male can simply decide that they're a woman, go into a toilet and start taking pictures and posting them. And, you know, it should obviously, I mean, it will justifiably make a lot of women feel like they're being spied on. And of course, in this case, this individual also went on to stalk a woman and I believe also engage in violent and intimidating behavior. So this is the tamest example I wanted to look at, and I say tame because it doesn't involve an act of physical assault in a toilet. However, it does involve doing something which will make a lot of women feel uncomfortable in a toilet, and it's being done by a biological male who has a history of violence towards women. So there we go. Anyway, let's look at the next one. So this example is much more of a just direct contradiction of the claim that there have not been any recorded examples of so-called trans women assaulting women in toilets. It's literally a direct contradiction of that. So this is from Metro. I am aware that there are a lot of adverts on the screen which look pretty horrible. If you can't tell, I've been looking for a job recently. Anyway, so a transgender woman threatened to stab a 10-year-old girl's mother during a terrifying sexual assault in the female toilets of a Morrison supermarket. Katie Dolotowski, 18, admitted grabbing the youngster by her face and forcing her into the cubicle before demanding she take her trousers off at the store in Fife, Scotland on 4th March. She carried out a similar attack just weeks earlier on 8 February when another young girl using the toilet at an Asda store in Holbeath spotted Dolotowski using a mobile phone to spy on her over the partition wall. This is, there's no ambiguity here. It is literally a trans-identified male dressing up, I guess, as a woman. Apparently women just look like emo boys, but dressing up as a woman to get into the women's toilets and then committing an unambiguous act of sexual assault, you know, using physical violence to try to force somebody to take off their trousers. That's sexual assault. So yeah, there's no ambiguity here. The claim that this has never happened is just not true based on this. And of course we should expect that it would happen, because you're literally giving violent predatory men a perfect avenue to engage in this kind of behavior. And not only that, but also we're talking about kind of trans-identified people who are already likely to have some issues going on in their kind of head mentally, which would be, you know, what's inclining them to believe that they are trapped in the wrong body and things like that. So you've got that kind of compounding the matter too. Next we have, so this is from womenahuman.com. Thank you for the reference. This is from the US, in case you think that, you know, people deserve it if they live on Turf Island. Trans-identifying boy sexually assaults 5-year-old girl in girl's restroom. I don't really want to read this one because it makes me uncomfortable just to read it. But yeah, it's not pleasant. You can read it if you want to, because I don't know. I don't want to read it. But basically, you know, obviously if you are the kind of person who would also not want to read it, which is, yeah, it's literally about a 5-year-old girl being sexually assaulted. It's not very nice, and yeah, really, really disturbing stuff. So I don't want to read it. You could pause it if you want to read it, but it is, I mean, having read it, yes, it is describing a sexual assault, and it's by a trans-identifying boy. Now, I would assume, so just for the record, this is from Women Are Human, so obviously trans-identifying boy, this is referring to a biological male who identifies as a girl. So there we go, just to clear up the kind of use of language there. It's an example of exactly what you said there were no examples of, so I'm really not sure how to deal with that. And I don't know, yeah, like maybe with this one I could say that you were kind of implying, like, in the United States But this is in the United States. So, yeah, really not sure what's going on there. And then finally, I just want to look at this one because it's interesting. It's from 1999 and somebody brought it to my attention. Cross-dressing man sentenced for battery. So a judge says the man convicted of battery who is awaiting a sex change could face harsh treatment in state prison. So obviously this was in 1999. The kind of language has evolved a bit recently. And therefore I think it's, obviously the kind of ideas of gender identity and trans women are women, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, it was around, I'm not suggesting that it was invented in like the 2000s or something, but it's become more in the cultural zeitgeist to talk about trans women being women and stuff like that. So that's why I would assume this person is being referred to as a cross-dressing man rather than a trans woman. Now, apparently, this person would identify as a woman because they felt that it was completely acceptable to walk into the women's toilets. So I'll just read these two paragraphs here. Hagen was convicted in July of punching a fellow bar patron in the mouth. The victim, 40-year-old Cheryl Parch, lost 5 teeth and could end up paying as much as $60,000 in medical bills. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really kind of depressing when you think about, like, imagine how much that's going to destroy this woman's life. And what did she do? The battery occurred in November 1997 at BT's, a Port Richey bar frequented by cross-dressers. Hagen was accused of battering Parch because she questioned his presence in the women's restroom. Oh, wow. So there we go. Again, I'm sure that there'll be some attempt to say, well, that doesn't count because this person wasn't a trans woman. It was a cross-dressing man, which is kind of funny because I would also point out that when J.K. Rowling wrote her book about a cross-dressing man who was, assaulting women, the point was made, well, she's not talking about a trans-identified male, she's talking about a cross-dressing man. And the entire, cancelled J.K. Rowling squad was like, no, it should be taken as referring to a trans woman, even though it is not referring to a trans woman, because cross-dressing man, like this, I don't know. So you can just, I guess when it's convenient, you can just assume that cross-dressing man refers to a trans woman if you want to accuse someone of being a bigot. But if you want to argue that trans women have never assaulted women in bathrooms, and also you're going to ignore the other 2 examples I gave of that literally happening, then I guess you could say, well, this is just a cross-dressing man, not a trans woman. But again, obviously, it's also a bit silly because the only difference here would be a matter of identity, which is obviously not a material thing anyway. Like, anybody could identify as a woman. So there we go. I wanted to record this little intermission. I will also say that the day I'm recording this, I literally just lost a 2-hour-long recording session I did in response to another video. So, provided, fingers crossed, that this actually gets saved, it's nice that I will be able to have recorded something for my YouTube channel today. And yeah, unfortunately, when I do have technical issues that basically mean that like a day's worth of effort goes down the drain, it just sort of means that like my production schedule has to get pushed back because I don't really have time to spend another 2 hours trying to catch up. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, at least I've got this done today. So there we go. Obviously not a very pleasant topic. But yeah, I thought it was worth stressing that this does happen. Now, I think after this, maybe goalposts will be moved and it'll be like, oh, so 3 examples, is 3 examples really what you're going to worry about? That's not very much at all. And, like if that happens, it happens. Like maybe people will say that. And if that's the case, well, then that's going to be kind of a different discussion. But at least for now, the original statement was that there have not been any, and I'm sure the exact wording was there has not been any examples of this happening. And that's just not true. There are at least 2 kind of, so I would say this should count as 3, based on the fact that I think the only reason this person does not identify as a trans, or did not identify as a trans woman, is because this was in the late 90s when that kind of terminology wasn't quite as common. And even if they don't identify as a trans woman, I don't think that's particularly relevant because you're still talking about a cross-dressing man saying this person is de facto identifying as a woman by going into the woman's bathroom, by saying, oh, it's my right to go in here. So I would say, like, if you're doing that, you're implicitly saying that you believe that you should be in the women's toilets because you are a woman. So whatever. I would definitely count this as a third example. And I would say, obviously, the first example I showed, obviously, is still something that's really not acceptable and was done by a trans-identified male in a women's toilet. So there we go.
So to deny trans people access to just using the bathroom in a public space is just attacking trans people to attack trans people. And using this fear-mongering tactic about men invading women's spaces is not only flat-out lies, but expressly transphobic.
First of all, they're not being stopped from using toilets. They can use toilets. Although apparently it did used to be the case. I can't remember what it was I saw this in recently. But women used to not actually, like, there used to be places where women didn't even have public toilets. So it's kind of funny that, like, these people talk about as if, like, anybody's saying that trans-identified people cannot use public toilets when they literally can. Nobody's saying they can't. There's actually no single person on the planet who's saying they can't. Whereas conversely, it used to be that there were many places which didn't even have public toilets for women in public places. So yeah, it's kind of an irony there.
In fact, both trans women and cis women face increased rates of sexual assault in our society anywhere, not just in the bathroom. Trans women are just as open to abuse as cis women. In fact, they often face more abuse because we are trans.
Okay. Firstly, I'll agree that there's definitely abuse that trans-identified males face on account of being, gender non-conforming. I wouldn't say they get any for being trans, because, like I say, being trans is just an identity which isn't even perceptible to other people, but whatever. As for, this claim that, like, you can get assaulted anywhere, well, yeah, obviously that's true. I think, obviously, it's kind of, I don't know, it's a bit disturbing to see that you literally have no conception of how, like, for women, the idea of having a space where it's just for women, it's just for biological females, there are no men there, why having those kind of spaces is really valuable. And by the way, I would say, like, the focus on toilets is one thing, but, like, obviously the other thing I think is, like, places for discussion, things like that, where, women want them to be female only, and they can't. And yeah, obviously that would be a really valuable thing when you consider the fact that they're so likely to be assaulted in other areas. To have somewhere where they know they're safe, a safe space, is totally valid. And I think it's, really, like I say, distressing that you would show such little sympathy for that.
Yet, by arguing differently, by putting transgender women's bodily autonomy underneath cisgender women's bodily autonomy, they are subtly denying trans women humanities over cis women's.
I think this will be a nice quote to end on. So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women less safe. What do you mean bodily autonomy? That's the thing. Like, you can use, like, bodily autonomy is a very dangerous word to start using if you're not talking very literally about it. When you talk about abortion, there's a very obvious sense in which that's about bodily autonomy. It's literally about something going on in your body. If bodily autonomy just becomes where you're allowed to put your body, different thing. And at that point it becomes a lot more kind of like, first of all, it becomes a useless term at that point, because I could say, like, why do I have to pay taxes? You're taking away my bodily autonomy because I use my body to make work. Like, that's literally, I've seen, like, libertarians make that argument. They've been like, well, if trans women, if women should be allowed to get abortions, then I shouldn't have to pay tax, because why is it that women are allowed to decide what's done with their body, but I have to decide that my body should be used to pay taxes for the government? Point being, yeah, as soon as you start kind of like allowing bodily autonomy to become this nebulous thing, it becomes a bit more ridiculous. And yeah, like I say, bodily autonomy, it shouldn't be about where you're allowed to put your body. And heck, I mean, can we just point out the obvious, like, implication of that would be like, well, my bodily autonomy is like where I'm allowed to put my body. I could literally say, like, in that case, like, women who refuse to sleep with me are denying my bodily autonomy, which of course is really gross and shouldn't be said by anyone. Basically, my logic is that bodily autonomy, if anything, it should be about, you shouldn't be forced to do things with your body, but that's not the same thing as being not allowed to do things. like a woman saying, I'm going to make you sleep with me. Obviously, I realize that's quite a rare thing, but it's just an example. A woman saying, I'm going to make you sleep with me. That would be denying my bodily autonomy. What wouldn't be is if she said, you aren't allowed to sleep with me. Similarly, saying like, I'm going to make you go into this place which you don't want to go into. That would be denying bodily autonomy. But it wouldn't be denying bodily autonomy to say, you're not allowed into this place. Because, yeah, you can't just say, well, I've got bodily autonomy. I can go wherever I want. I'm a free citizen. Am I under arrest, sir? Am I being detained? No, it's nonsense. So, yeah, it's not denying the identity of trans-identified people, and it's not like placing them beneath. Yeah, like it's just have some perspective. Anyway, I think we've been recording for long enough. We didn't even like make it very far at all. I was wondering if like the kind of density of different arguments was going to get lower, as it were. Like it was going to be kind of like more sparse, but it seems like it's pretty much remained the same. So I think I'm just going to allow for reacting to this video to be quite a long process. To be fair, like literally the thumbnail of the video I clocked as I was clicking on it said like everything you need to know about TERFs. And I was thinking, okay, well, if it's everything you need to know, then I guess it is going to take me quite a while to reply. To be honest, I think if anything, I probably rushed through part 1. And I probably things I could have responded to. But now that I've kind of given up on the idea that I'm going to be able to get through this, like I was thinking like, oh, I'll get through in like 3 videos. Seems unlikely. So we'll just see how long it takes. All right. Anyway, I'll just say that thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And please do like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe, particularly if you want to see the next parts. And if you haven't seen the first part, you probably should have gone back and watched that earlier, but you might as well watch it now. And yeah, I mean, regarding the Amazon thing, check that out if you're interested in that. And apart from that, I'll just say thank you to my current patrons.